She is a cultural anthropologist and senior research scientist at Intel Labs, the research group at Intel Corporation. Since 2006, she has brought her understanding of human culture to the world of high tech in order to help design products and experiences that benefit the broader world. She's currently studying how increasing the instrumentation and digitization, the Internet of Things, might help to enhance cultural resilience in the face of climate change in both wild and urban environments. Previous to working at Intel Corporation, she focused social impact assessments in United States and Caribbean fishing communities. Kitner holds a PhD in anthropology and Latin American studies from the University of Florida.
So I can't see you guys in the audience hardly at all, except the ones in white shirts. But I'm here today, and I think I'll probably just stand at the podium, to talk to you about anthropology and at Intel Corporation. So the name of my talk is Culture, Gender, and Power, working as an anthropologist at high tech and in high tech. And the question I get when people ask, Kathy, what do you do? What's your job? I say, well, I'm an anthropologist. Oh, that's really interesting. And what do you do? And I say, I work at Intel Corporation. And they say, what? You're an anthropologist that works at Intel? What do? Dig up old computers? And then I laugh and I say, no, it's not an archaeologist. Anthropologist is something different than that. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I'm trying to remember exactly what I want to say. I'm a cultural anthropologist employed in high tech, looking at how people and technology interact in everyday life. And I do what is called applied anthropology. So if I do anthropology and cultural anthropology, what I do is I learn about the culture of people, how they use technology, and then I apply that knowledge to the problem at hand, to solve a problem. And I'll give you examples of certain kinds of problems that we've worked on at Intel in the group that I've worked with. And so just to kind of step back a little bit, as an anthropologist, you get a certain kind of social science training. And as you move through your training as a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and PhD, I just stepped on the cord, finally a PhD, there's various kinds of jobs that you can work in. And I wanted to just kind of go through some of those options that people have. So we have health and medicine, so there's an awful lot of anthropologists that are now employed as medical anthropologists. We even have some working at Intel. And they'll look at things like how culture, how people's beliefs, let's say, in hot and cold, and how that affects the body and what foods you should eat, in kind of their folk beliefs of curing and healing, and how that might interact with, let's say, a diabetes treatment regimen. There is, and so you might get people at OHSU that are medical anthropologists that are working alongside teams of surgeons or pediatric doctors, all various kinds of things you can do. There's been a lot of work in HIV, drug addiction specialists, etc. There's a lot of anthropologists now working in business, an awful lot working in the area of human rights. So you might be looking at jobs at the United Nations, at the World Bank, or at smaller NGOs around the world. There's education. There's a large group of anthropologists now working on environmental issues. Anthropology and the environment and climate change is a growing, swelling part of the discipline right now. Lots of jobs there. And the reason I'm going through these is to give you some idea of the breadth of what anthropology deals with, and if one of those things might interest you in thinking about people and a certain aspect of what people do, there's usually a job for an anthropologist. Disaster research management, international development, and a lot of these kind of cross over sometimes. So you might do international development and human rights. And lastly, there's what I do, which is working in high tech. Now I'm calming down a little bit. Okay, So what do I do at Intel day to day? So I focus with a team of people, and the team that I work with is made up of other anthropologists, psychologists, both clinical psychology and more research, kind of theoretical psychology, sociologists, economists, and also we employ quite a few designers. So there's also an anthropology of design, or just straight interaction design or industrial design. And we focus on how people practices and institutions matter to technological innovation. So the speaker before me was talking about disruption. We're kind of always looking out into the future and seeing what's coming down the pipeline. What are the trends that are going to disrupt technology innovation, technology production, technology use. And we work across the company, and we also work with researchers around the world. So I've collaborated with people in South Africa, Australia, England, Chile, Mexico, etc. So it's a very international corporation that I work in, and it's a very international look that we take in our work. We also use the tried and true and sometimes new techniques of social science and design to develop a deep understanding of how people live and work together in the world today. And then we translate these insights into trying to influence future Intel products to satisfy the needs of real people in the world. And a lot of times people say, well, what have you done? What can you hold up? And hopefully in the rest of this talk I can show you a little bit of how we've influenced the development of products. So we don't actually make the products in Intel. We don't make the chips. We're not in there in the fabs. But we're influencing how people see the world so that they can better design a better chip going forward. So what does all this mean in practice? Well, I just kind of alluded to that. These are three guys, and I liked their picture, so I wanted to share it with you. They work in the informal economy in Johannesburg, South Africa. They get up very early every morning, and they go to the fruit and vegetable market. They load up a small pickup truck full of tomatoes and oranges and potatoes, whatever fruits and vegetables they think people would be interested in buying that day based on the weather and the temperature, the political situation that's going on. They bag them up in little bags, and they jump on the commuter trains that run through Johannesburg every morning and every night, taking people to and from work. And they sell those fruits and vegetables, and that's how they make their living. They're in the informal economy, and the reason I brought them up is because we did a smartphone project with them, again, trying to see how this large part of kind of the hidden economy of South Africa is using technology. So that's one example. I'm looking for, there we go. The first project that I worked on, which is almost 10 years ago, this time of the year, was called Street Smart Spaces, and it was in Xiamen, China. So I had just started at Intel, and I found myself on a plane heading to China with this group of people you see on the left-hand side of the screen. There were some researchers from Microsoft, from Nokia, the cell phone manufacturer, and Intel. And what we did, which is a very kind of anthropological thing, we took a holistic perspective of that whole city in southern China, Xiamen, and tried to understand one street. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen the lower slung buildings there. That was the one street that we chose to look and see how people moved and lived and acted in that space in order to try to predict what that street would look like today and what kind of technology innovations might be new, interesting, or critical to people's lives that would really matter. That street has since been destroyed. They knocked down all the buildings and they put up the high-rise buildings there. People really were excited about that. And a lot of that, the work was carried out also in Brazil and in London. A lot of that went into designing ideas of presence. So you've seen the computers with the double screens. That was an idea that came out of this work in order to be able to share what you're doing. The title of this paper included the word gender, and so I've spent a lot of time in some of the projects that I've done looking at women and girls and their interactions with different kinds of technology. Spent a long time, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, looking at the use of cell phones and smartphones and how that was impacting people's lives around the world. We know what a kind of a change that's made in our lives, and we complain about it a lot, that we're too connected, and you never put down your phone, and you don't talk to your friends, you text them even though you're in the same room. But at this point in time, that was not quite the situation in India. And we did the work in Bombay and in a smaller town. And we found that girls and women live by very different rules, particularly when it comes to technology use. So the girls had much more structure in their lives. They were much more constrained in what they could do. Their parents gave them much less independence. They had less privacy in the home. Sometimes they had to share their room with their parents, where their brother got his own room. And they were very much controlled. They couldn't go out without an escort in many cases, or couldn't go out past a certain time at night or earlier than a certain time in the morning. The girls' phones that they had would usually be something quite different than if they had a brother who had a phone. The brother's phone would be like the latest model Samsung, and they would get an older, more beat-up flip phone by Nokia. It was usually gifted to them. They had no choice in the matter. But they used that phone in ways that really allowed them to kind of extend and change their existence in the world. They couldn't go to cyber cafes or shared computing places like telecenters, places that have a bunch of computers that I'm sure you've seen pictures of, because it was considered too dangerous for a woman to be there. So they were left with their little phone. And they made it work for them. They developed networks of friends, all different kinds of friends, secret texting. They all wanted a touch screen at that time so that their parents couldn't hear them texting on a like the keyboard types that we used to have on phones. And they got around their parents a lot because of their parents' ignorance of what was going on. At the same time, the mothers, we found, were really pushing for a new future for their daughters. And so at the same time that these phones were coming into existence and girls were pushing the boundaries, their mothers were also kind of standing behind them and saying, we want a better life for our daughters. And so things have changed a lot now in India, particularly in the urban areas. In the rural areas, not so much. Now, in the United States, as I was putting together this talk, I said, I really want to talk about women here, because one of the problems that we've heard a lot about in the news lately are the lower numbers of women that are in technology. And in a talk like this at a high school like Sunset, I thought I really should talk a little bit about how we need to get more women into computing, not just the boys, but the girls. Because currently, as you see on the screen, women only make up 26% of the computing workforce. And that was 2013, and I'm sure the numbers haven't grown much. In fact, they may have shrunk by now. If you look at the bottom on the right-hand side, in the 1980s, 37% of computer science majors were women. Nowadays, it's 18%, and I think it's even less than that. That was 2012, so the numbers have dropped even further. Women feel very uncomfortable in a lot of technology settings. When I'm at Intel and I walk into a room, it's usually all men. There's nothing overt or anything like that. It's an entrenched kind of thing that if we just get more women in there, it'll be a better place to work. We'll have better ideas, more diverse ideas. So Intel has just put forth the $300 million diversity initiative to get more girls into computing. So if you want to talk about something like that, please contact me. I'll give you my email address at the end. But women aren't the only ones without power. If you think about the dream of the internet, and maybe because you're young, you don't know all this that was talked about so many years ago, but the idea was the internet and connectivity would bring the world together. It would bring peace and harmony, and everyone would be able to share knowledge. We could send medical images around the world and help doctors in places that, they didn't have access to all the best and the greatest technologies or knowledge. It was like this great hope. But what we're faced with now is there's still an inequality of access to the internet and to internet technologies. If you look at North America at the top, it's almost 90% of the United States and Canada is connected or has access to the internet and everything that it offers. And then the numbers go down. You see the yellow line, that's the world average. I don't know if you can read that from out there. That's the world average is who's got access to the internet. It's only 42% of the world population, which is over 7 billion. So we're still not even halfway there. The worst case is at the very bottom, and that's the continent of Africa. And remember, these are averages. So in urban areas, you're going to get a lot of connectivity, you're going to get a lot of smartphone use, etc. But as you move further out from the cities, that numbers go down. And in actuality, if you think about access to computers and full-on laptops and everything, that number, 26% at the bottom for Africa, is probably about 9 or 10%. And what makes up the difference is the new rise in mobile phones and smartphones. So we still have a long way to go. Again, power was in the title, and I started kind of playing with this. One of the problems with that lacking the access to the internet is there's a lack of access to electricity. And so about 1.2 billion people in the world still lack access to any kind of electrical current. Therefore, they can't charge phones, they rely on batteries primarily, or they just go without any kind of light or any kind of power. A lot of that is going on in India, and so when I was in India, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were in Gujarat. We were looking at an organization called the Self-Employed Women's Association, which is an NGO that works with women kind of at the bottom of the economic ladder. And they do various kinds of education, training, job creation projects. One of their projects that they had that worked really well, because it served 2 different groups of people, was they trained these women that you see here on the screen to construct and make and repair solar-powered lanterns. And so those lanterns that also charge cell phones with solar power were then sold by these women as a little kind of private business to other villagers who then made small, like, micropayments to pay it off. So while these women got an education and a skill in learning how to build those and repair those, the people that were buying them also got access to light so that their kids could study at night. The women didn't have to cook just by firelight. They didn't need to use so much firewood, etc. So air quality improves. So there's all kinds of things. But that's still a very, very big problem that needs to be solved. My latest work has been working on what was mentioned before, the Internet of Things, the kind of everything in your home is connected, your washing machine, your dryer, your Nest thermostat on the wall. You can adjust it, through using your phone. What we're trying to do in Chicago is develop a sensor network in a certain watershed, a couple of watersheds, to give early warnings to residents of imminent floods. And so in order to do this, we have to put sensors that are connected to the internet all over this certain water basin that floods primarily in the spring and the summer. So in 2013, they had one woman was flooded out 6 times, and I'm flooded worse than this picture shows. So what we're trying to do is learn how to do that kind of long, big deployment of a sensor network in the environment in order to combat things like that we're facing from climate change. And along with that comes too much water, then there comes drought. And so this is a map that shows in the dark red areas the most drought-ridden places in the United States. The white areas are okay. Blue is a little too much water. And so how do we deal with drought? Is there a way that technology could help ameliorate some of the conflicts that go on over access to water? In the Klamath Valley, there's still a lot of conflict between the tribes and the environmentalists and the farmers. We know that the drought in California has caused a lot of anxiety and anger against the farmers for taking so much water. They're under water restrictions, and this situation continues across the world. So the question I'm asking, is there a role for technology, and if so, what would that role be? In wrapping up, and this was a kind of very quick talk, which I think it's better to be quick and not bore you and leave you wanting a little bit more. But a word of caution. So there's a story, not a story, there's a very famous article in Anthropology called Steel Axes for Stone Age Australians. And it looks at bringing steel axes to the Aborigines in the outback of Australia in the 1940s, and what that did to the Aboriginal culture, and how it from the introduction of simple steel axes instead of the stone axes that they used, it actually destroyed their whole culture, completely just whoosh, wiped it out. Very simple technology had a very, very big, large negative impact. And so if I tell you that what we need is electricity in India, a lot of people will jump up and say, let's go build a power grid. And then maybe they do build a power grid. And maybe 2 years after they install that power grid, it's fallen to pieces because they forgot to train people to repair it. And the road to the road of good intentions is littered with many, many of these technology projects that have had good intentions but failed and are no longer in existence. So it's not as easy as it looks, and you should stop, employ an anthropologist who can give you that whole cultural viewpoint, and then you'd be better off going ahead with your project. I guess I'm going to end it there and take questions. It's really disconcerting to not be able to see your audience and not see if they're listening to you or going like that. Does anybody have any questions? It was a very quick kind of talk.
I guess just personally, did you face a lot of skepticism going into engineering companies?
Did I face skepticism?
Well, did you find that you're doing
So, I guess two ways to answer that. There have been anthropologists that have worked in high-tech way before me, but not that many. And so it's still kind of a new field, and there's still a lot of skepticism. So you'll say that you interviewed 40 people and you do in-depth qualitative interviews, and people will still want to know the statistics of the survey that you did when you never did a survey. So there's that kind of skepticism. Engineers can be a very hard lot to talk to as a qualitative researcher, because they want things very, cut and dry and in a process from A to B to C, etc. On top of that, then being a woman is even kind of like you're seen as soft and squishy anyhow, and so you do have to combat that a little bit. But I think because I work in a good group of people, we all support each other that way, and I think things are changing. I think the trailblazing has occurred, and I think now people are more used to seeing it. It's much more common. You see more articles about it in business journals and things like that. So you would have an easier time. Yes.
What's your opinion on Japanese current development as its social structure is changing here right now? Since that, as I've been hearing and reading and studying into, Japan's social structure is beginning to degrade because of how the demands of women for men, such as women see that men should be bolder or having higher income, being taller. Well, how do you think that this is going to influence Japan within the next 30 years, since that their population is now beginning to decline?
So this is my opinion. First, I preface this by saying I'm not an expert in Japanese culture. I could probably answer that better if you asked me about Mexico or even the United States. But looking at that question and kind of taking it out of Japan and saying what happens, let's say in India or in the United States, when women get more power and men are feeling a little bit less powerful. I would say that's happened in the United States quite recently. There's been a lot of backlash against the women's movement and against feminism in the past. I hear it less now, although it's still there. I personally don't see how you, by empowering 50% of your population to be a fully contributing member of society in both ways, so that neither one is put down, neither sex is put down, I can't see how that would be a bad thing. So I think, there's a transition period, but I think in the end it'll come out okay.